hope and something to believe in, so we throw away our logic and reason. It's mosque in the morning and church in the evening. These so-called holy books, we eat, sleep, shit and we breathing. We give anything for a savior, but no one will save it. They keep telling you, wait till later. But my people are dying, dog, the numbers are major. Why God can't throw me some paper? Yeah. And when it comes to Jesus, I can't say shit. Even though he came on a slave ship, reduced our religions to pagan, said curse be Canaan. It's his cross, I see that you're waving.
Exposing the matrix of religion, part 1, Christianity. Dr. John Henry Clarke, one of our grandmaster teachers, professor, historian, academic pioneer, says a few interesting quotes. It says, to control a people, you must first control what they think about themselves and how they regard their history and culture. And when your conqueror makes you ashamed of your culture and your history, he will need no prison walls and no chains to hold you. And I think that's the place where we find ourselves in today. The conqueror has made us ashamed of our history and our culture and has made us adopt a different one. Another one he states is, religion is the organization of spirituality into something that became the handmaiden of conquerors. Nearly all religions were brought to people and imposed on people by conquerors and used as a framework to control their minds. And again, we'll be speaking about the governments involved, the emperors and the empires involved, and the powers that be that were involved in bringing these religions to people and imposing them on people, and how they went about doing it. And the final quote I'll read of him says, every single thing that touches your life, whether it be religious, socially or politically, must be an instrument for your liberation, or you must throw it in the ashtray of history. So, put simply, if it ain't gonna benefit our liberation, it has to go. Strong foundations. Very important to what we're talking about today, as I'm going for the root of Christianity, as it's called the matrix of religion. And in the root of Christianity, we'll be speaking about the patriarchs, we'll be speaking about the church fathers, we'll be speaking about emperors involved and so forth. So we're going to check out if these foundations are built on the rock or built on the sand. As just like what it says in Matthew 7 verse 24, it was a wise man who built his house upon the rock. So when the rains descended and floods came and the winds, it fell not, as it was on the rock. While the foolish man built his house upon the sand, and when the rains came and the floods came, it fell, and great was the fall. And essentially, that's what will eventually happen to these religions if we rely on them. The fall of our people would be great, as the foundations of which we are deciding to stand upon is not actually on solid foundation. Let's now go into the Matrix, the pill scene, and let's see how this Matrix movie ties into this presentation.
This is it. Let me give you one piece of advice. Be honest. He knows more than you can imagine.
At last. Welcome, Neo. As you no doubt have guessed, I am Morpheus.
It's an honor to meet you.
No. The honor is mine. Please, come, sit. I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
You could say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate, Neo?
No,
Why not?
Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Now on the screen is a transcription, a crude transcription I should say, and it states the Matrix, just like Morpheus said, he said the Matrix is everywhere, it is all around us, even now in this room. You can see it when you look out your window or turn on the TV, and you can feel it when you go to work or go to church and when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you of the truth. You are a slave, like everyone, born into bondage. In a prison you cannot smell, taste or touch, a prison for your mind. Now a prison for your mind can be likened to a paradigm. A prison for your mind is when somebody changes your worldview, and so you're looking through the lens of another person's glasses. Effectively, you're looking through the lens of another person's culture, another person's politics, another group's mind state. And that's why everywhere you go, because it's been imposed on minds all around the world, this Western mind state and this religious mind state, everywhere you go you will find it, whether it be in the room, whether it be when you're looking out your window, turn on the TV, it will be all around you. Okay, so, and today I'm hoping that the viewers of this presentation will be choosing between myth or reality today, or at least being able to put myth and reality in its proper place, so you know how to use myth to benefit yourself and how to ensure that you keep it real, essentially. So we're gonna go into some definitions before we go into the presentation in the full. And I'm gonna start by reading, it's a couple of pages of definitions, so I'm gonna read these definitions out, and these are all taken from the Oxford Dictionary. So it says the matrix. The matrix is the cultural, social, or political environment in which something develops, and has its origin in the word matri, matter, which is mother or womb. So essentially, when we're talking about the matrix of religion, we're talking about the womb in which religion was born from, okay, in which this Christianity was born out of. Paradigm is a worldview underlying the theories and methodology of a particular scientific subject. In science and philosophy, a paradigm is a distinct set of concepts or thought patterns, including theories, research methods, postulates, and standards for what constitutes legitimate contributions to a field. So again, we're talking about how you see the world, the concepts that you see the world in, and the thought patterns in how you look at things. So when we're looking at the Matrix movie, those clips, when Morpheus is talking about when Neo's asking what is the Matrix, and Morpheus is describing it, in this essence, it more relates to the paradigm. So the paradigm of today is equivalent to the Matrix in the movie. Okay. Dogma, a principle or set of principles laid down by an authority as incontrovertibly true. Root word comes from the Greek dogma, which means opinion. Opinion, a view or judgment formed about something, not necessarily based on facts or knowledge. Belief, an acceptance that something exists or is true, especially one without proof. Something one accepts as true or real, a firmly held opinion, a religious conviction. Conscious, to be aware of and responding to one's surroundings and having knowledge of something. Knowledge are facts, information, and skill acquired through experience or education, the theoretical or practical understanding of a subject. And epistemology, the theory of knowledge, especially with its regards to methods, validity, and scope, and the distinction between justified beliefs and just straight opinions. Just from those definitions alone, to some the penny may have dropped, but those definitions are going to be very important to what we'll be discussing today, and the decisions that you may be making in regards to myth and reality going forward. Next are some extra definitions. We have theology, which is the study of the nature of God and religious belief, and it's also religious beliefs and theory when they are systematically developed. And a theologian is a person who engages or is an expert in theology. See, and it's not the see that you do with your eyes, as in ICU. This one is the place in which a cathedral church stands, identified as the seat of authority of a bishop or an archbishop. So it's the area, okay, it's a location. Amanuensis, a literary or artistic assistant, in particular one who takes dictation or copies manuscripts. Scriptorium, a room set apart for writing, especially one in a monastery where manuscripts were copied. So a scriptorium was the ancient way of basically copying manuscripts, and the amanuensis was the person who actually did the writing. And this was all before the technology of copying was created. We got cosmogony, a theory regarding the origin of the universe. Fallacy, a mistaken belief, especially one based on unsound arguments. In logic, it's a failure in reasoning which renders an argument invalid. So you got to be careful about using fallacies when building your arguments about something. Bias. A bias is an inclination or a prejudice for or against one person or a group, especially in a way considered to be unfair. It's also a concentration on or an interest in one particular area of subject. And finally is also a systematic distortion of statistical result due to a factor not allowed for in its derivation. Concept, an abstract idea, It's also an idea or mental image which corresponds to some distinct entity or class of entities or to its essential features, or determines the application of a term, especially a predicate, and thus plays a part in the use of reason or language. So your concepts that you have determines how you use words, okay, and determines the reason or use of language. Hellenism, the national character or culture of Greece, especially ancient Greece. And please family, you've got to realize that the ancient Greek culture is not something that the Europeans should really even be proud of, except for the fact that they are the earliest culture of any significance. That's why they're actually proud of them, because they've basically given Europe the modern civilization that they have today. But in actuality, ancient Greeks were heavily involved in pedophilia, homosexuality, and a lot of other ills. But if you research Hellenism, so you can get a bit of a background as to what that actually is, very important to understand. Got a definition of culture, what an agent is, and what pedigree is in general. And then you've also got this word at the bottom, mnemonic, which is a system such as a pattern of letters, ideas, or associations which assist in remembering something. So keep these terms in mind, or make a note of these, screenshot the page or whatever. Now, language and thought. Language is the central vehicle for concept formation. So, i.e., the concepts that we develop inside our minds. Language has a strong role to play in how these concepts are formed. So language offers the concepts and mechanisms for representing and making sense of our experience, thereby radically shaping the way we think. Though language does not completely determine thought, it still affects people's habitual thought patterns by promoting the salience of some categories and downgrading others. To give you an idea, when we talk about language and concepts, in parts of Africa, they have a concept known as, or a word known as Ubuntu, which doesn't translate into any single English word, and there's no single English concept that encompasses what Ubuntu is. So therefore, for us to actually give a true definition of the term Ubuntu, we'd have to use many different terms from the English language to sort of get close to what this one word or concept actually meant. So that's just an idea of how a concept could shape your thoughts. So that's, and the beauty about the concept of Ubuntu is to do with seeing your community as an extension of yourself, and that I am me. Well, I can't exist unless you exist, and I can't have unless you have, unless we all have. So it's a very beautiful concept, but there's no equivalent to that in European languages. So we won't be able to think in that way. That's why it's very important to study our African languages in general, so we can start to be more in sync with the concepts of Africa. Also, it says the King James Bible, either directly from its translators or indirectly, has contributed far more to English in the way of idiomatic or quasi-proverbial expressions than any other literary source. And this is the reason why I feel people of the Abrahamic faiths have a hard time grasping or placing a high value on certain concepts like pantheism, animism, and matriarchy, as it's not found in the Bible. Once people hear what these concepts are about, although they are linked to our ancestors' systems, they don't quite resonate with people because we're viewing the world through an English mind state, basically, for English or European language. And also, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so works of art in worship spaces had both a commemorative function, but it also had a didactic function, which is teaching. In the world today, we have been shown images to reinforce the concepts of the Bible. So, the image of white Jesus, the image of a white God in general. These are images that have been placed in our mind by design and not by accident. Okay, so a lot of people, especially if you've been raised in the West, and you've been raised in, I'm going to speak from Christianity's point of view, when you first used to visualize what God looked like, especially growing up, your first image would have been a white man, maybe with a long beard, who's sitting on a cloud, controlling events on earth. And your first image of Jesus, when you close your eyes, it may be of this white Jesus. These images have been planted in our mind through the media, through these worship places that we attend, images even in our grandparents' homes, and places in our families' homes in general. So nowadays I know people are moving away from these white images as they come to that realization. But hopefully by the end of this, you'll realize that even the story itself, the whole compilation of the Bible, is also white in its language and in its concepts. So today, family, I'm going to encourage everybody to think outside of the box. The box that what I'm asking you to think outside is the paradigm that religion has put your mind in. It's the prison that Morpheus is speaking of. It's the program that's been pulled over your eyes, and you see the world through this box. But now it's time to come out. Feel free to ask any questions, because at the end of the day, truth is what's important, and not everything in the Bible can be proved to be 100% true. Okay, and I want you to also start to look at your body as a piece of hardware. Just like a computer hardware is limited by what software you put into it. So if you put Android on your smartphone, there'll be some apps that work on the Apple that won't work on the Android, and vice versa. There'll be apps that work on the Android that don't work on the Apple, or they don't work as good, and things like that. You put the Apple disk in your Windows computer, and the computer says no. So it's similar with the body. If you look at it as a piece of hardware, and you look at these different religions as the software or the paradigm that you're placing onto your mind, and once you are running this program on your mind, you won't be able to accept concepts or apps that come from outside of the software you've now put onto your hardware. So it's time to release your hardware of the softwares and free your mind. So the question I asked today is, will you be taking the red pill or the blue pill? The red pill will symbolize reality, that which can be historically verified to be true, that which we know, and that which are the facts. Or will we decide to choose the myth, which is historically false, and which relies one to believe and to follow another's opinions? Now, not to downgrade what a myth is, because myths are really powerful, but you need to know that they are not historically true. And the basis of this presentation today is to find out that which is historically true and that which is historically false. So grab a pen, a piece of paper, and make some notes, and please share if you care. Facts or opinion, evidence or hearsay. Please always keep in mind, when you're doing research or when you're listening to somebody present, how to discern between facts and opinions, evidence and hearsay, and ensure facts and evidence always trump opinion and hearsay. They always should remain king over opinions. If you educate a man, you'll educate one individual. If you educate a woman, you'll educate a family. This is the Fanti proverb from Africa. So women, I understand that you are the key educator to the child, and so we are relying on yourself to make those crucial notes and to ensure the little ones actually watch videos like this, so we can start to open minds of the next generation. And men, please take a leaf out of the women's book and pass this information on to all those who need it. Give a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day. Teach a man how to fish and you'll feed him for a lifetime. So today's presentation is not just for me to give you the knowledge, which is symbolic as the fish, but it's also to teach you how to discern between truth and falsehood, so you too yourself can see knowledge in the right way and come to the right conclusions, and so stop yourself being duped by fake teachers in the future and false information. Critical thinking. Disciplined thinking that is clear, rational, open-minded, and informed by evidence. Thinking about one's thinking in a manner designed to organize and clarify, raise the efficiency of, and recognize errors and biases in one's own thinking. The etymology of this word implies a critique, identifies the intellectual capacity and the means of judging and of being able to discern. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've got to be your own worst critic, especially when we're dealing with information that has been shrouded in mystery due to the powers that be not wanting you to see behind the veil. It's like the Wizard of Oz not wanting you to see behind the grandeur, behind the theater. Okay, but today we're gonna lift the veil and we're gonna dig deeper, and critical thinking is gonna be the key to getting an understanding of the matrix of Christianity. Also, when you are critically thinking, there are 6 important questions you must ask. They're all on the screen just here. Once you ask who said it, you're getting it from the horse's mouth. What did they say? You're finding out not what hearsay says or what somebody said they said. You're finding out exactly what they said. Where did they say it? You're getting a location. When did they say it? You're getting a time period, a date. Why did they say it? You're finding out why would somebody do something, like a motive. And how did they say it? And of course, all of these things are adding context to the information, and it's ensuring that you cover all the bases around a piece of information. Because if you get something and you don't know what time it happened in, and you don't know who quite said it, then there's gaps in the information where once you find that information out, it might not fit into what you the conclusions that you've actually formed. There's some illustrations on the screen that show about the difference between rushing to a judgment and taking time and doing critical thinking, and some other reasons why critical thinking is quite important. Along with critical thinking, we have methodology, and methodology is the systematic theoretical analysis of the methods applied to a field of study. It comprises the theoretical analysis of the body of methods and principles associated with a branch of knowledge. Typically, it encompasses concepts, there's that word again, such as paradigm, theoretical model phases, and quantitative and qualitative techniques. So it's the approach, it's the way you go about doing something. I've listed a couple of methodologies below. We've got the scientific method and the historical method. Both are used in history to come to conclusions, but it's a process that ensures that you check all bases. And so I'm just going to read what these processes entail so you can see for yourself that it's quite thorough. So a scientific method is a method of procedure that has characterized natural science, consisting in systematic observation, measurement, and experiment, and also the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. To be termed scientific, a method of inquiry is commonly based on empirical or measurable evidence, subject to specific principles of reasoning. So simply put, it's all in there. And then you got the historical method. The historical method comprises the techniques and guidelines by which historians use primary sources and other forms of evidence, including archaeology, for example, to research and then to write histories in the form of accounts of the past. The question of the nature and even the possibility of a sound historical method is raised in the philosophy of history as a question of epistemology. Remember that word we defined at the beginning? The study of the historical method and of different ways of writing history is known as historiography. These are methods that will ensure that you are researching in the right way. on the screen as well. I've just left a couple of step-by-step research approaches, which is, again, it's a scientific and a historical, but please do more further research. All of these terms that we're putting on the screen are fields of research that go a lot deeper than the information that you'll see on the screens. This is just to give you a taste, just to wet the tongue, wet the lips, so you can get curious and start investigating further. Now, when you are doing your research, generally you're going to come across, you're looking for sources of information. Now, there are three types of sources, or they've been categorized in three ways. You have primary sources, secondary sources, and tertiary sources, and it goes in that order. Primary would be number 1 in terms of importance, secondary would be number 2, and tertiary would be number 3 in terms of importance. You got to be careful with primary sources, because if you're not expert in the particular field and you're attempting to decipher the language on a particular primary source document, or you're looking to make a conclusion on some primary source, it can sometimes take years of study for you to understand the nature of particular primary sources. So a good way is to look at secondary sources. In scholarship, a secondary source is a document or recording that relates or discusses information originally presented elsewhere. Secondary sources involve generalization, analysis, synthesis, interpretation, or evaluation of the original information. So in instances where you have enough expertise and have enough background in a particular area, then by all means study those primary sources, come up with those original hypotheses about what it is you are analyzing. Where you concede that you may not be an expert in a particular field, then read the best of the scholars who form hypotheses on these primary sources and construct history around them, because it will give you a good place to start. And also you got your tertiary sources, which with your tertiary sources you've got to check the sources behind them, the secondary sources behind them, and the primary sources behind them, because tertiary sources are just a compilation of information, such as like encyclopedias, and even this video that you're watching now, this is also a compilation of information. And at the bottom and top I've just left on there what archival research is and what research is in general. So we're going to look into the second clip of The Matrix. It's when Morpheus has Neo in the test program and is teaching him some very valuable lessons. Let's take a look.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress?
I was...
Look again. Freeze it.
This isn't the Matrix.
No. It's another training program designed to teach you one thing. If you are not one of us, you are one of them.
What are they?
Sentient programs. They can move in and out of any software still hardwired to their system. That means that anyone we haven't unplugged is potentially an agent. Inside the Matrix, they are everyone, and they are no one.
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
Someone.
I won't lie to you, Neo. Every single man or woman who has stood their ground, everyone who has fought an agent has died. But where they have failed, you will succeed.
Why?
I've seen an agent punch through a concrete wall. Men have emptied entire clips at them and hit nothing but air. Yet their strength and their speed are still based in a world that is built on rules. Because of that, they will never be as strong or as fast as you can be.
What are you trying to tell me? That I can dodge bullets?
No, Neo. I'm trying to tell you that when you're ready, you won't have to.
We got trouble.
So, after watching that scene again, we have another crude transcription on the screen. But put simply, Morpheus is telling Neo that the Matrix is a system. Just keep in mind, remember that this, in our context, is a paradigm. The Matrix is a system. The system is the enemy. Inside the system, there are businessmen, teachers, religious ones, lawyers, carpenters. These are the very same people we are trying to free. But until they are free, this makes them part of the system, and this makes them dangerous. Try to understand that most of these people are not ready to be unplugged, and many of them are so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to protect it. Keep in mind that those who set the paradigm, or who set the matrix, control the think. Well, those who set the paradigm control the thinking of the people, as we've explored earlier. And anyone who is not free is, unfortunately, potentially an agent. That could be family members, that could be friends, loved ones. If their mind is not awake in a particular way, then they could potentially be an agent. And eventually we will go to war with the powers that control the paradigm, just like in the Matrix movie, where Morpheus is preparing Neo, and he does state that everybody who has fought the agents in the movie's context, the agents are really the powers that be. Everyone who has fought them has been killed by them. Now, let's just back this up and put this in context of what we're dealing with here today. Now, the Matrix as a system in the movie, I would consider it the paradigm of racism, white supremacy, and obviously in the context of this presentation, the paradigm is Christianity. And I'm of the view that Christianity and racism, white supremacy are intrinsically linked, and we will explore why I feel that way as we go through this video. And inside the system of Christianity, there are many of our black people are present. Many of them are in good positions as businessmen, teachers, lawyers, XYZ, even pastors and reverends and deacons and so forth. And these are the very same people we are trying to free. But until they decide to take that red pill, they are part of the system and they can become agents on us. So that scene for me is to teach those who are coming into this Pan-African mind state and are coming into this form of consciousness to be aware how we engage with people, even people that we are trying to help, as sometimes it can work against us and we have to move strategically. Knowledge or belief essentially is what we're looking at today, and I've highlighted the root of knowledge, which is know. And if you look right in the middle of that word belief, you'll see those three damning letters that spell lie. I've given the definitions to those earlier, so please take another look if seeing it like this is opening some avenues, some mental faculties. And I've also left a few Bible scriptures on this page as well to show you how the Bible tries to align belief with truth, which is quite confusing. Try to align belief with knowledge, where it's to throw people off. And then when I've reasoned with many from religious background, one of the main things they've come with is that before you know anything, you need to believe. So I've never understood it, so I'm going to just tell you how it really is, because knowledge is more required to believe, because once you know something, you can then form you can then have a justified belief in something. But if you believe without having any knowledge in something, then what you're essentially doing is removing your faculties to know in the first place. You can spend a whole lifetime chasing dreams, trying to find the end of the rainbow, but sooner or later you'll come to the realization that you won't find this end of the rainbow. There's no pot of gold right there. So it's essential that you know these things before you waste your time in the paradigm of belief. Now, myths. Myths can mean many things to many people. An approach to understanding myths is to know that they explain the human experience. They can explain things that are beyond ordinary explanations. These are the unanswerable questions, such as how did humans get here and how the universe was created. When reading myths from other cultures, even our own, one finds that what a myth is saying may not be literally true. That's what we're speaking about today. Despite it not being literally true, so despite the Bible not being literally true, myths can have the power to convey universal truths about the human experience, ideas, emotions, philosophies, and concepts that humans from all cultures can relate to. Some of these are the explanation of a custom or practice, beliefs, and about God's ancestries and even our ancestries, man's ancestries, and legendary heroes and cosmogonies, which is the theories of the creation of the universe. Once you understand that myths are not literal and are used as a mnemonic device, storing wisdoms that can be passed down generation by generation, so you're storing the wisdom of a culture, the question you need to ask yourself is, why is one person's myth considered historical and literal while other myths are not seen in this way? Which authority has imposed that ideology onto my mind, has imposed that box, has put my mind into that box? And what we also need to keep in mind is Israel relatively is a tiny nation in the scale of nations in general. The culture that came out of that landmass was heavily influenced by other cultures around it, and so you'll find similarities in the Bible and in the Hebrew culture in general to many other cultures. So why must the world engage in considering that tiny landmass now called Israel? Why must the world take that mythology on as being historical and literal at the expense of their own myths? That's the question you've got to ask yourself. And why would an authority want to do that to you? And it's just like what our Grandmaster teacher, Dr. John Henry Clark, said: it's to control our minds, put simply. So, myths. The patriarchs of the Bible are mythological. And it's not every single character in the Bible is mythological. We're talking here about the foundational patriarchs of the Bible. So on the left, I've left a list of these patriarchs who I'm talking about: Adam, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Joshua, Samuel, David, Solomon, and Jesus. So I'm sorry to all my Rastafari, the Hebrew Israelites, the Christians, the Muslims, but unfortunately these characters did not exist in history. And we got to be specific, because you can find a character with a similar name, but you will not find a character that fits the time period, that fits the name exact, and most importantly fits the stories in the Bible, to be exact. All the miracles and all of the supposed events that occurred surrounding a particular character, you won't find those outside of the Bible. So, and there's clues throughout this whole stories in the Bible that should start to really, once you start to critically think, you should begin to understand that these are myths, and that you should be looking at a different type of allegorical meaning from the story as rather than a historical meaning from the story. So, for example, Adam lived to 930 years old, I believe, and his rib was removed in order to create Eve. Lived in this Garden of Eden, which was a utopia, a paradise, and was expelled based on Adam and Eve. Eve talking to a talking serpent who enticed her to eat of a special tree that God placed in the garden. And once you hear the story is a myth, unfortunately. You follow that lineage down, you get to Cain, who kills Abel, and now we're supposed to have 3 people on earth: Adam, Eve, and Cain. Cain walks out of the presence of God, goes into the land of Nod, and finds himself a wife. So there's fallacies inside the story, is what I'm trying to explain. Remember that word, fallacy? Let's go on. That lineage continues. Eventually we reach Noah. Noah's an important character because it's where the ideology of the ethnicities come out of, the races, if you like, come out of Noah. So Noah is a character that has a magical boat which houses all the animals on the earth, as God is going to save them from the flood. I don't know how the polar bear made it onto the boat and how the penguin made it onto the boat, because there's a large amount of water in between the location of Noah's boat and where these penguins are. The penguins don't fly, and so they have no means of reaching over here. So we see fallacies, and the size of the boat as described in the Bible is not big enough to house all the animals on the earth. So again, we see another fallacy. These are clues that these are myths, and then we go into the story of Noah's 3 sons, Ham, Japheth, Shem, and it's through the line of Shem where we get the Israelites and all the prophets of the Bible, and it's through the line of Ham where we get Canaan, and Canaan seems to be the enemy of the Bible, and he's the one who is cursed by Noah before he is born for the transgressions of his father Ham. So it's a very deep story, and ones do need to look at that more deeper, especially if you are of a African background. Noah died about 950 years old himself as well. You know, people are living for 1,000 years long. Then we get to Abraham. Abraham, I believe he died about 175 years old, had a son fairly late in life, and God ordered, or the angel ordered him to kill his son, his only son at the time that he had waited so long for, and then in the last minute an angel stopped him from going ahead. And this is the line where all Hebrews come from. They say Abraham is the original Hebrew, which means one, he who passes over. Then we get Jacob. This lineage continues to get Jacob, and Jacob is the deceiver because he deceives his brother. He tricks his brother out of his birthright because his brother Esau is the oldest and is due the birthright. He tricks his brother out of that, tricks his father into passing on the blessings onto himself, and this is all with his assistance from his mother, who Jacob was the favorite of the mother, while as Esau was the favorite of his father. Jacob wrestles with God. Some say it's an angel he wrestles with, and wins as well. There's so many myths ascribed to Jacob, and it's Jacob who gets his name changed to Israel by God. This is where we get the Israelite nation comes from, his lineage. So Abraham, Hebrew; Jacob, Israel. Then we get Joseph, and Joseph's a character that went into Egypt, sold by his brothers. We get Moses, interesting character. Now let's put this correct. Moses, born in the River Nile, that would make him an African. Born in the River Nile, raised in the wisdom of the ancient Egyptians, and he's the one who, according to this tradition, writes the first 5 books of the Bible, known as the Pentateuch. Now, here's the myth. This guy is parting parting the sea. This guy is receiving the 10 Commandments on top of Mount Sinai, handwritten by God's lightning, or somehow passed down to him from God. Calls the 10 plagues, does a manner of miracles, and there's a lot of similarities between Moses and Jesus in terms of a liberation figure in the Bible. But again, no historical basis, and the ancient Egyptians kept great records, and there's no record of a mass migration of these Hebrews leaving Egypt by potentially over 1 million people leaving Egypt all in one go and crossing the sea. And when we're dealing with history, they keep trying to impose these characters on people in history. They'll tell you that Moses was Akhenaten in one breath, then they might say he's Tutmosis, or they might say he's Ramses, and essentially they're trying to place him into a time period that is actually real and historical, but it always falls down because the narrative doesn't quite fit the Bible in totality. We got Joshua, Samuel, David, Solomon, and Jesus. Now, just to quickly show you, there's no valid primary sources. There are no dates given in the Bible. There are no writings from the supposed times of these patriarchs. No tablets, no monuments, no artifacts, no structures, no graves, nothing to be found outside of the Bible for the patriarchs. Now, if you look at the pictures, you will see that a lot of these patriarchs have a big beard. This big beard, as you can see, follows through all of the characters in their art, and this is part of the concept forming. So these are the type of images that you will see when you close your eyes and you think about these biblical characters and so forth. Now, let me bring your attention to the bottom 3 pictures, where we've got Jesus on the bottom left. In the center at the bottom we have Zeus, and to the right of Zeus we have Serapis. And what ones need to understand is that Zeus and Serapis predate Jesus, and actually Jesus, the principles of Jesus are modeled around Serapis, and Serapis is modeled off Zeus. And it's basically the Greek culture finding its way into this religion that is called Christianity. Please do some research on Serapis, as you'll find the early followers of Serapis, which is BC period, we're talking 200 BC approximately. They called themselves Christians and saw Serapis as a savior deity, and Ptolemy that brought him in was Ptolemy Soter, which means savior. And you can see the concepts of Christianity all being developed in the Ptolemaic period, with the deity as Serapis, which is a composite deity. So they've combined Apis and Osiris to forge this god. They forced the native Egyptian priests to create them a god in a Greek image, so we can be taken away from worshipping gods that had an African image, as you can see with all the images that are painted on the walls in Egypt. Now we've established that the patriarchs ain't real. Let's get into a field called patristics. And patristics is the development of Christian doctrine. These are the architects of this paradigm, this Christian paradigm, and so the architects of the matrix. Patristics or patrology is the study of the early Christian writers who are designated church fathers, amongst those whose writings form the basis for patristics. And in the list on the middle of the screen, we have a list of all the prominent church fathers, and you've got to do some research on a lot of these characters, as these are the ones who went and developed the canon of the Bible, who decided what books was going to be in, what books was going to be out, A lot of them were involved in the translation process, and a lot of them attended ecumenical councils, which is where the decisions were made to form the canon in the first place and to iron out any issues in Christianity to make it a unified, codified religion. So what's important to understand when looking at this page here is that before these church fathers, there was no standard form of Christianity, and there are some scholars that will give a term called pagan Christianity, and it's because many concepts that were in alignment with our ancestors and were not in alignment with this Christianity we have today was considered legitimate Christianity, because there was no authority that was imposing a particular ideology, a particular canon on what Christianity was. And there were many books around the region. So just to give you an example, we've got two examples on the left. We've got Arius, who was prominent in the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea at 325 AD, and he took the stance that Jesus is the Son of God who was begotten by God the Father at a point in time, and is distinct from the Father and is therefore subordinate to the Father. Whereas Athanasius, he was of the opposite, and his stance was that Jesus is also the Father. And so in the end, the Athanasius theology ended up getting the nod at this council. And it wasn't just Athanasius who thought this way, because obviously it went to a vote, and many of them voted for the concept that Athanasius was behind. And then you have another character called Macedonius, who he actually denied the divinity of the Holy Spirit. And you had Arius had his followers called Arians, and Macedonius had his followers called Macedonians, and these were legitimate Christians who held prominent positions, and that's why they were actually invited to the ecumenical councils in the first place, was because they had some authority within the church, within their respective churches. There are tons of examples of different Christian ideologies that were victim to this new Christian ideology that was going to take form, and is actually the origin of the Christian doctrine that we have today, and it's the origin of the Bible we have today. I've dug the internet and tried to find the most African looking pictures of the church fathers, just trying to show you that I'm not biased, and there are African looking pictures out there, but it's just to show you that Africans were involved in the development of the Christianity that we have today. Although what you've got to understand is we were the most literate people and most educated people at these times in history. And so if anybody was going to write a new religious doctrine, if anybody was going to write anything in great quantities, African influence had to be somewhere about, but also heavily as well was Roman influence, Greek influence, Turkish influence, Syrian influence. So there was other influences all around the place, and there was Africans that lived in these regions also as well. Analogy to consider would be someone like Colin Powell or Condoleezza Rice. Those are black people who work on behalf of America. So although there are black people involved in the administration and involved of the military strategies, essentially they are fighting for the benefit of the nation of America. And these church fathers, whether they be black, blue or orange, they were fighting they were building this ideology on behalf of the church. There's Eusebius. This is the character who gets to decide a lot of these books not to be included in the Bible, in the canon that he was constructing. So the Epistle of James, Jude, Peter, 3rd of John. The list is on the screen highlighted in red. He took the decision not to recognize those books as part of the canon. And you got to ask yourself the question, who gives him the authority, and who gives any of these church fathers the authority to be able to develop this canon at the expenses of other people who may hold different views and who are perfectly legitimate Christians. Let me get into Gregory of Nazianzus. Now, I'm going to read this one out because this character is quite interesting, especially for African people. Now, he's also known as Gregory the Theologian. He was a 4th century Archbishop of Constantinople, which is modern day Turkey, which is Istanbul, and he's a theologian. He's widely considered the most accomplished rhetorical stylist of the patristic age. As a classically trained orator and philosopher, he infused Hellenism into the early church. And I've described that Hellenism is the Greek culture. He infused that into the early church, and he established the paradigm of Byzantine theologians and church officials. Gregory made a significant impact on the shape of the Trinitarian theology amongst both Greek and Latin-speaking theologians, and he is remembered as the Trinitarian theologian. Much of his theological work comes to continue to influence modern theologians, especially in regard to relationship amongst the three persons of the Trinity. Along with his brothers Basil the Great and Gregory of Nyssa, he is known as one of the Cappadocian Fathers. Gregory is considered a saint in both Eastern and Western Christianity, and in the Roman Catholic Church he is numbered among the doctors of the church. Doctrine. Okay, and in Eastern Orthodox Church and Eastern Catholic churches, he is revered as one of the 3 holy hierarchs, and is one of only 3 men in the life of the Orthodox Church who have been officially designated theologian by epithet. So that's Gregory the Theologian there. Very important character in the formulation of Christianity that we have today. And it's a shame because even our African-centered Christian groups like Hebrew Israelites, Rastafari, they actually conform to the concept of the Trinity that this Turkish character crucial in creating, and it's not necessarily African based. Hence we have the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. There's no mother involved in that process. So we have 3 head deities, all with a masculine energy. I'll say no more. And now when they were going about translating the so-called older text into the text that they were compiling, the screen is showing a list of errors that they could have made. I'm not going to go through them, but it's just simple things such as a confusion of letters that look similar. They may have substituted similar sounded words, and evidence of these types of errors have been found throughout a lot of the translation copies of these ancient texts. So please do some research on these terms. As you can see, they're very easy mistakes to make, and they were made. As nobody's perfect, we're only human, we're not machines, and this is prior to the technology of print. It was all human done. Now those are errors that were made unintentionally. This next screen we're looking at intentional changes, and I've listed 6 of the intentional types of changes that they would make. And we can see here there was instances where they were actually revising the grammar and the spelling in an attempt to standardize the grammar and spelling of the book. So they wasn't quite happy with the grammar and spelling as it was. And for those who understand the importance of grammar, you'll understand that in the English language, if you move commas and place emphasis on different words in different places, you can change the whole context of a sentence, even though the words themselves may not have changed. So you got to be careful when someone's revising grammar and spelling intentionally. They were also harmonizing particular passages. So some scribes displayed a tendency to harmonize parallel passages and to introduce stylized expressions, and Gregory the Theologian was one person who was quite well adept at stylizing these expressions. We've also got instances where they were eliminating apparent discrepancies and difficulties, so even fallacies that they came across themselves and things that they felt just didn't sit together, they were quite difficult. They sought to fix what they perceived as the problem in the text, and it's crucial that you understand it's what they perceived. So it's not what the tradition says, what Moses perceived when he was writing it, or what all of these early writers of the Bible, according to the tradition. It's actually the church fathers that cleaned up or doctored the books that we have today, based on what they felt needed doing. It mentions the Origin perceived a geographical problem in John 1:28, and so he changed it from Bethania to Bethabara. And what you got to understand is Origin is the one who is credited with the Hexapla, which is a translation or a copy of the Septuagint, which we no longer have the original Septuagint, so we have to base it on what Origin, one of his copies, and look here, is guilty of eliminating discrepancies and difficulties. What else has he done that we do not know of, as we don't have the original text on which he copied from? They also was conflating the text. So when a scribe was aware of variant readings of a text, he would include both variants in his copy. So it says below, instead of saying one book would say Lord, another book would say God. So when they conflate it, they'll say the Lord and God, okay, rather than choosing which way to put down. They also adopted different liturgical traditions. So when we're talking about the liturgy, we're talking about individual churches here. So in few isolated places, it seems that church liturgy influenced some textual additions. So you're just adding things into the Bible and wording changes. So each church would have their own little tweaks to the Bible that would suit their agenda, essentially, suit what they want to teach. And then finally, which is quite a bombshell, they would actually make theological or doctrinal changes. Now, there is evidence that in some manuscripts, scribes made theological or doctrinal changes, omitting something that they considered as being theologically incorrect, or adding something to clarify the statement. And then they give you an example there. But this is really serious, because they're actually telling you here that the whole doctrine has been changed because it didn't suit the theological agenda that they were creating. And this is why the Bible is not Afrocentric. It is not aligned, it is not created for African people, because the theological agenda was the emperor's agenda, essentially, and the leaders of the church's agenda, and it was all about control of the masses in those times. So there we have it, intentional changes. Here we have the oldest surviving manuscript. So I've tried to put a couple of charts on the screen here, so you can ultimately see that the King James Bible was not directly copied from the ancient manuscripts. Instead, it was compiled from the previous printed Bibles that came before it, in which the William Tyndale Bible of 1525 is heavily important, because many other books that came after copied from the Tyndale, and the King James eventually copied from those books there. And as you can see here, Dead Sea Scrolls don't even play a part in the books on the left hand side, and that's essentially because a lot of things in the Dead Sea Scrolls contradict some of the concepts that are on the left hand side, and so it wasn't necessary to have them included in the canon. And it was only when these scrolls were found that it could be proved of the discrepancies between the ancient scripts and the scripts that we have today. On the left illustration, the circle, what I've circled is A, B, and that symbol, which is the Aleph symbol in Greek. And I've put a little code below them because the Aleph is symbolic of the Sinaiticus Codex, B is symbolic of the Vaticanus Codex, and A is the Alexandrius Codex. And these are the oldest complete Bibles that we have today. And as you can see, they are all said to be copied from the Hexapla. Because of the date of the Vaticanus, they say that could actually have come directly from the Septuagint. And it's important to understand that the oldest Bible is the Septuagint, which unfortunately we don't have, so we only have the Hexapla, or with the New Testament including, we're talking about the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus. The oldest books we have are written in Greek, not Hebrew, as you may believe, not no Semitic language, but in Greek language. Now, I've talked about the church fathers, we've talked about the scripts that were used, and now the earliest ones are Greek. So I'm trying to show you that nothing is African when we go through this matrix of Christianity. And now we're going to go into the sees. I gave the definition of see in the beginning. These are the seat of authority, place where the cathedral and church will be. And so we have one in Egypt, and we got to understand that Egypt was controlled by the Romans. And we have one in Antioch, which is modern day Turkey or stroke Syria. Got the See of Rome, which everybody knows is in Italy. And then we also have the See of Constantinople, which is again in Turkey. And so as you can see here, all the major seas are outside of Africa. We even have one in Europe. And even the one that is in Africa, it is in a conquered African nation that had been conquered for hundreds of years by the time the See of Alexandria was formed. Those are the powers that create the paradigm. One of the other tools that they use is the catechetical schools. And this is education in the faith of children, young people and adults, which includes especially the teaching of the Christian doctrine, imparted, generally speaking, in an organic and systematic way with a view to initiating the hearers into the fullness of Christian life. Two major catechetical schools are the School of Alexandria and the School of Antioch. Now, the patriarchs of these 5 sees consider themselves to be successors of those given special status in these canons. These are the full list of sees of all the Christian world at that time, and I've highlighted the ones in red which are actually based in Africa. Then we get the ecumenical councils, and these councils are called on behalf of the emperor for the bishops to attend, so they can thrash out certain ideologies and start forming their canon. Now, dating back to the beginning of the Christian religion, there were numerous views regarding God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and the connection that each had to one another as well as to humanity. The group who would actuate the establishment of a universal Christian doctrine, presently known as the Proto-Orthodox. So that's what we call them today. We call them now the present Proto-Orthodox because we know that group would now become the Orthodox group. They fought vociferously against the promoters of ideas which they deemed heretical. No divine spirit told them it was heretical. These people took the authority upon themselves to deem other people's philosophy of Christianity heretical. I suppose they had the most power and the most influence, so they were able to push their ideology through. It says here the need for stability within the Christian community ultimately led to the convening of councils designed in part to address and condemn the heretics, instituting a doctrine of the faith endorsed by the proto-Orthodox leaders and the Roman Emperor alike seemed to be the most effective means by which to accommodate such a goal. So here we see the faith is endorsed by the proto-Orthodox leaders, so these are now the church leaders, and also the Roman Emperor. Very important. Ideally, the realization of this objective would purge Christianity of theologically heterodox positions. However, the desired result and the end result proved to be as divergent as the arguments on which the councils were born. So although they were trying to iron out, they ended up making splits in the Christian world. So we have Nestorians and so forth and so forth. I'm not going to get into that right now. In the story of Christianity, the first 7 ecumenical councils, from the first council of Nicaea to the second council of Nicaea, represented an attempt by church leaders to reach an orthodox consensus. restore peace, and develop a unified Christendom. That unified Christendom that they're speaking about will be the Christendom that will later take over the world, essentially. It will take over the world, evangelizing people, and we will talk about that Christendom a little bit later. Eastern Orthodox Christians, Oriental Orthodox Christians, Nestorians, and Roman Catholics all trace the legitimacy of their clergy by apostolic succession back to this period and beyond, to the earlier period referred to as early Christianity. So what it's basically saying is, no matter what division you come from, what your ideology is, as long as you are conforming to the canon of the Bible, then basically your basis is from these ecumenical councils called by Roman emperors and the proto-Orthodox leaders. The era begins with the First Council of Nicaea, which enunciated the Nicene Creed, that it is the original form, and as modified by the First Council of Constantinople of 381, was seen by all later councils as the touchstone of orthodoxy on the doctrine of the Trinity. The Roman Emperor Theodosius had published an edict prior to the Council of Constantinople declaring that the Nicene Creed was the legitimate doctrine and that those who opposed it were heretics. And just to note, I've left a illustration on the screen just to illustrate to you that all of these ecumenical councils were called by the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, which is in Turkey, and all were held in the Eastern Roman Empire. So all of them were not only called by the Eastern Roman Empire, but they were held in their territories. Now the Bible canon. From 300 AD onward, the term canon, usually in the plural, was used in reference to the regulations or decrees that came from the councils and thus regulated the church. Thus, with these and many other similar uses of the term by the church, it is not surprising that the term eventually was applied to the list of books regarded as authoritative by the church. This development did not come to fruition until the second half of the 4th century. The first instance of such usage seems to have been in the Athanasius decree of the Synod of Nicaea, soon after 350 AD, in which he describes the shepherd of Hermas as not belonging to the canon. So here the canon takes a slightly different definition, and it's applied to the list of books that were going to be deemed authoritative by the church. And here we see Athanasius in a decree stating already that the shepherd of Hermas can't belong to this canon. In 363 AD, the Council of Laodicea, I'm probably pronouncing these names wrong, so forgive me, declared that the only canonical books as opposed to the non-canonical books should be read in church service. So this is the beginning of what should be read to the liturgy. And then in 367 AD, Athanasius, in an Easter letter, important Easter letter, identified which books are canonical in opposition to which books were apocrypha. The bottom line concerning the question of canon was whether or not the origin of the document is the Holy Spirit. So what you got to ask is, what you got to understand is that these people were deciding what was of the Holy Spirit and what was not of the Holy Spirit. And whatever they said has now been set in stone, and the paradigm of Christianity today takes these things as gospel and doesn't question them. And nobody knows, a lot of people know. It's quite surprising that many of our brothers and sisters spend a lifetime in these churches and their pastors and their leaders don't share this information, and I'm not sure if they know this information themselves. So here we go. Keep listening on. Please pause this page, read the rest of the information. It's very important. I mean, the earliest and most explicit testimony of a Hebrew canonical list comes from Flavius Josephus in his treatise Against Appian, Book 1, Paragraph 8. Josephus describes the canon used by Jews in the 1st century AD. This document was actually composed in 95 AD, and he speaks about the 5 books of the Torah, 13 books of the prophets, and the 4 books of the hymns. So that would become the Old Testament canon. But Athanasius is talking about Old and New Testament alike, further along down the line in history. Those books that were printed but not included are described as the Apocrypha. Those books that were never printed, just never included and remained as books. And when I say printed, they were never printed as part of the Bible. They're known as pseudepigrapha. And there's just tons of those books. I'm going to give you a list on the next page. And then you have Christian apologetics, which are some of the church fathers were apologetics, and then you've got apologetics from every age going forward. And you've got Christian apologetics to this day. And what they like to do is present historical, reasoned, and evidential basis for Christianity, defending it against its objections. So they're trying to make it literal by presenting a historical basis for it, and trying to reason to sort of get you to understand some of the concepts inside the Bible. But as you can see, there's so many fallacies through it. I'm surprised that you can actually attempt to use reason on a book such as the Bible. They wanted to suppress the role of women and make the Bible literal. And what I'm giving you here now is a list. I want to say it's a comprehensive list, but it's got a lot of books on here that were actually Christian books, but not part of the canon and therefore deemed non-Christian eventually. Some of them are used in different sects of Christianity, like in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, they use the Book of Enoch. Syrian Church may use another book as well, different types of books. So they all have slightly different canons, but essentially the foundation canons all come from the ecumenical councils that I spoke of. So yeah, the Acts of Thecla, Judith. Well, Thecla is a very interesting story. So women can get a lot of strength and power from these stories, should they read them and sort of get the wisdom that's behind them. We have Judith, Susanna. We've got the Gospel of Mary, which is Mary Magdalene. Very, very important. There's even a Gospel of the Virgin Mary. I don't think I've got it on the screen here. But all these types of texts were not to be included. And a lot of these books you're seeing on the screen contradict some of the concepts that were developed at these councils, and so just could not make their way in the book. So we have these people hiding information from you, basically, and creating a paradigm that you would take on as the word of God. The Christian agenda. How did they go about ushering in Christianity where it is so firmly placed in modern society? So prior to Christianity becoming what it is, pre-Orthodox, non-canonical Christians were persecuted in the Roman Empire. Okay, so they were persecuted. This whole Christian movement, albeit pagan or whatever it would be, they weren't liked in the Roman Empire, and there were some horrific crimes against them by the Romans. But then came the Constantinian shift. So with the Roman Emperor Constantine, we get the Edict of Milan in 313, and we also get the first ecumenical council of Nicaea, where the Nicene Creed is created. And from this, Christianity is tolerated within the Roman Empire, and there starts to become a shift where the people start gravitating towards Christianity as the emperor is trying to almost promote this as the new religion coming forward. So Roman Empire is a complete U-turn in that respect. Keep in mind also at 340 AD in Axum, Ezana is declaring Axum a Christian nation because he was converted by who would become Saint Frumentius. Roman emperors proclaimed Christianity as a religion of the empire, and that happened in 380 AD with the Edict of Thessalonica. Then we get the persecution of pagans and the seizure of their wealth, and that is done under the Roman Emperor Gratian in 382. So only 2 years after Christianity is proclaimed as the religion of the Roman Empire, they begin their assault on the pagans. They then begin to close the pagan temples with the Theodosian decrees, and some other matters occur with the pagans in this period of Theodosius. Now, the temples were places of learning. This is where where you could become a priest, and priests were taught about all manner of sciences, maths, astrology, biology. There was so much to be learnt in these temples. So a lot of people were learning a lot of things from these places, and so they would have been able to see the fallacies in Christianity and the issues of Christianity. So these temples were closed down. It wasn't just Greek temples, because they did close a temple in Athens, the schools in Athens, but there was ancient Egyptian temples all throughout the regions, and they were closed down on the order of the Theodosian decrees. There was an important battle, which they say is the battle that ended paganism. So do some research on the Battle of Frigidus, however you pronounce it, which is 394 AD. And another interesting feature to note is that Emperor Theodosius II and Valentinian III then decided to burn the books of the non-Orthodox Christians. So Christianity that didn't conform with the Christianity that they were ushering in or that they had subscribed to, they proceeded to start destroying them. And that's probably why a lot of these texts no longer exist, and maybe would get a better understanding of an African form of Christianity, unless these events occurred. But now we're left with the Christianity we have today, thanks to these people that I'm telling you about now. And the final nail in the coffin for the Kemetic culture was the close of the Isis temple at Philae in 336 AD by Justinian. Please research all these points in time, because they're very crucial into understanding how Christianity was ushered in and how it effectively won the battle against all the other religions that were competing at that time. Now, how did we as Africans get Christianity? The first African nation ruled by Africans to accept Christianity is the Kingdom of Axum. We also have the Moro-Roman Kingdom, which is found in modern-day Morocco and Algeria. But they're slightly different to the Kingdom of Axum, because with Axum, the king chose to proclaim that one the Christian empire. Whereas in Moro-Roman Kingdom, they were previously a Roman province, and once they expelled their conquerors, the Romans, they retained the religion of Christianity. And we also have Egypt and Carthage, that Roman provinces, so they had Christianity forced on them, as the 380 Edict of Thessalonica declared it the religion of the empire. Now the rest of Africa, so that's other than the countries that I've just mentioned, received Christianity via the transatlantic slave trade some 1,000 years later or so, approximately. And the African nations converted, so the leaders of these African nations converted, as it was essential in trading with the Europeans to get guns, weapons, and to benefit from the trade. So we're talking about the Akan leaders and a lot of the other different tribes in West Africa. And after over 400 years of having this form of Christianity, you got to really look at the situation of our people and ask yourselves, where are we? So after serving this God of this Bible for so long, where are we? And we're at the bottom, and we seem to be getting lower. So I understand that this isn't a God that is actually serving us as a people. But until we wake up and come to this realization and start believing in someone else's opinions and taking someone else's authority, who doesn't have your best interest in heart, you will continue to be victims of the paradigm of Christianity. We're going to go into the King James Bible. This page here is trying to describe how the King James Bible relied on Greek text, the Byzantine family of manuscripts, which in that illustration I was showing you earlier, when I showed you that the oldest Bibles to be found was the Septuagint and the Hexapla, and the King James follows from, and the early copies of the Bible were based on the Latin Vulgate, which was copied out of these books, and some of the Geneva Bible, the Bishop's Bible, the Tyndale Bible. A lot of them were translated from this Byzantine family of books. Erasmus there is an important person in this year. But let's go deeper into the sources. Now, King James gave the translators instructions to compile his Bible, designed to guarantee that the new version would conform to the ecclesiology of the Church of England. Certain Greek and Hebrew words were to be translated in a manner that reflected the traditional usage of the church. So here we go, changing things to the particular church's agenda. The text of the Bishop's Bible would serve as a primary guide for translators. If the Bishop's Bible was deemed problematic in any situation, the translators were permitted to consult other translations from a pre-approved list, which was the Tyndale Bible, the Coverdale Bible, Matthew's Bible, the Great Bible, and Geneva Bible. In addition, later scholars have detected an influence on the authorized version from the translation of the Taverner's Bible also, and the New Testament of the Douay-Rheims Bible. It is for this reason that the flyleaf of most printings of the authorized version of the Bible observed that the text had been translated out of the original tongues, and with the former translations diligently compared and revised by His Majesty's special commandment. I've had to chop that out of the original Bible then and stick that at the bottom, so you can understand that it wasn't a direct translation from the oldest codexes that were available. The translators appear to have otherwise made no first-hand study of ancient manuscript sources, even though those like the Codex Bezae would have been readily available to them, in addition to all the previous English versions, including, and contrary to their instructions, the Rhemish New Testament, which in their preface they criticized. They made wide eclectic use of all printed editions in the original languages then available, which included the Syriac New Testament, would have included the Latin Vulgate, and the other Bibles that we speak about here. They were all consulted. So it's important to understand what they were trying to do is continue what the early church fathers set into motion. They wasn't looking to go back into ancient texts and get the origin of Christianity and bring that to the people. They were building on the established canon that was formulated by the early church fathers on behalf of the Roman Empire. Boom. Here we have is the King James translation teams. I'm sorry to the people who are looking for William Shakespeare, but on this official list of the committees and individuals involved, it makes no mention of William Shakespeare. The task of translation was undertaken by 47 scholars, although 54 were originally approved. All were members of the Church of England, and all except Sir Henry Savile were clergy. So there we have it. There we have the Archbishop Richard Bancroft. He was the chief overseer of the authorized version of the Bible. I've got his image on the next slide. They had all completed their sections by 1608, and so from January 1609 a general committee of review met at Stationers' Hall, London, to review the completed marked text from each of the 6 committees, and so they just wanted to make sure everything was all in harmony. In 1604, James VI, or King James, convened the Hampton Court Conference, where a new English version was conceived in response to the problems of the earlier translations perceived by the Puritans, a faction of the Church of England. The translation is noted for its majesty of style and has been described as one of the most important books in English culture and the driving force in the shaping of the English-speaking world. So when we talked about language, thought, and concepts earlier on, you can understand that these books, this King James Bible, very important in this English culture. So there wasn't just one King James Bible, as we have been led to believe, but in the wake of its first printing in 1611, the King James Version went through 244 reprints in the following 200 years. Nevertheless, the reception of it was not unanimously positive. Hugh Broughton, a leading Hebrew scholar, though one who was excluded from the translation team, was outspoken in his criticism, criticizing especially the translator's rejection of word-for-word equivalence, and stated that he would rather be torn in pieces by wild horses than have this abominable translation ever have it foisted upon the English people. So this leading Hebrew scholar, did not like the translation that he was reading. It lacked word-for-word equivalency. Now, since the Bible was only replaced in 1881 by the Revised English Bible, there is an assumption that it remained unaltered between 1611 and 1881. This is not the case. There were minor revisions to correct the words and phrases throughout the world. Below, I've made a list of these minor revisions, but to me, the word of God that is infallible shouldn't really need revising by these Europeans that I showed you on the previous page, who were part of the Oxford committees, Cambridge committees, Westminster committees. These are slave traders that are in effect putting their hands on these holy scriptures that people who subscribe to the Bible consider these holy scriptures, and these slave masters have their hands all throughout the book. We've got Samuel Ward, John Boyer here revised the text and introduced longer marginal notes. The two Cambridge editions of 1629 and 1638 attempted to restore the proper text while introducing over 200 revisions of the original translator's works, chiefly by incorporating into the main text a more literal reading originally presented as a marginal note. So we're getting more word-for-word equivalency, so they say, more literal translations here. I'm not going to go into it here, but it also lets you know that there was another version that was authorized by the Act of Parliament. So here we're seeing governments getting involved, and that was in the year 1662. So keep note of that year as well. Nevertheless, the 1701 introduced two features which are important. It was the first to use the terms BC and AD, and then you have this character called James Ussher, and they included his chronology of the world, which stated that the world was created in 4004 BC. So people who take on the King James Version of the Bible also are adhering to the notion that the world was created but 6,000 years ago. Now, we've got structures, artifacts, and evidence of African civilization that predates for 6,000 years. We've got 10,000 years, we've got 20,000 years ago. But if you follow the chronology of the Bible, the world was created in 4004 BC, and so the artifacts of your ancestors you would have to then dismiss. So please absorb the information on that page. That picture at the bottom on the left, that's Archbishop Richard Bancroft, and he was the chief overseer. And again, I've tried to find as black as picture as I can for King James, because black people, we like to claim he's black, but just like Colin Powell, he's fighting for the agenda of Britain, and I will show you on the next slide what type of agenda that was. So King James, the father of British slavery and the start of English slave trade. As early as 1618, King James I had granted a patent to a company that wanted to trade for gold and precious woods in Africa. Other groups received rights to trade in Africa but never dealt with slaves in any major way. So what essentially they're describing is a monopoly on the slave trade for Britain. Now, English involvement in the slave trade would intensify after 1663, so that's when it really intensified, but a new patent was issued in the Company of Royal Adventurers. England had realized that the money to be made from trading slaves to the West Indies and Virginia by 1668, over a quarter of the new company's profits was derived from the slave trade. Africans in Virginia's early years. The first documented arrival of Africans to Virginia was in 1619, which is the year after King James created this Royal African Company when an English warship, and they were sending warships. Keep note of this story. The warship was called what? The White Lion, that arrived at Point Comfort in present-day Hampton. The African captives had been forcibly removed from a Portuguese slave ship, subsequent to being attacked by the White Lion and another English warship, the Treasurer, while sailing in the Bay of Campec. Now, what we've got to also understand is another character called John Hawkins. He was financed by Elizabeth I, but he was the first Englishman to kickstart trading of slaves. But when we're talking about scaling up and forming a company with this in mind, we're talking King James did this, and that's why the first colony was named Jamestown, which we're going in. Agents in Jamestown. So merchants in London associated with the residents of Jamestown were also heavily involved in the slave trade. Merchants in London, we're talking these Oxford, Westminster type people here, yeah. John Jeffreys, one of the merchants, owned part of a row house in Newtown, and historians speculate that slaves were sold in front of the building of the wharf. John Page, Colonial Nathaniel Bacon, and William Sherwood were all prominent Virginians who served as factors, agents, or representatives of the company. And the company's decline came when many factors contribute to the loss of the Royal African Company's monopoly, because this was a monopoly that only this company could trade in the slaves on behalf of the British. First and foremost, the company was not achieving a profit. As a matter of fact, it resorted to borrowing money to pay dividends. Then there were the complaints from the planters. This is people in the plantation. They demanded slaves. See, the demand of slaves was always too high for the company alone to supply. So the planters urged that the monopoly be abolished so more slaves could be imported. So this really just opened the gateway and gave them a taste. Once they understood how sweet slavery was for them, and how bad it was for the African, they cranked it up heavily. Finally, the company, which was heavily patronized by the Stuart monarchs, which is, we're talking about Charles as well, we're talking about King James and so forth, it fell out of favor when James II was disposed and William and Mary came to the throne. Then how was this slavery legitimized in the first place? How did Christianity play a part in the slave trade in the first place? And we're talking about the transatlantic slave trade. So the raids and attacks of the Reconquista, which is when Christendom, the Europeans, came together and started to take back lands that the Muslims had taken. They created captives on both sides who were either ransomed or sold as slaves. So they started selling their prisoners of war. The Portuguese crown extended this to North Africa after the attacks on Ceuta. The king sought papal recognition of it as a crusade. And essentially a crusade is something that's done on behalf of the Pope. And when you want papal recognition, you want the Pope to recognize what you are doing is legitimate in Christianity. So similarly, after the 1441 attack on Mauritania, the crown again sought after the fact. So when we're talking about the crown, we're talking about the king. The king sought papal acknowledgement that this was part of a just conflict. Such a determination would then indicate that those captured could be legitimately sold as slaves. So here we go. The first papal bull, the first decree introduced from the Pope, was issued in 1452 by Pope Nicholas V. It authorizes Afonso V of Portugal to conquer Saracens and pagans and consign them to perpetual servitude. This is the beginnings of this type of slavery that has lasted hundreds of years and we're still feeling the effects of as African people. Thank you to the Christian Church. The next decree was Romanos Pontifex, and this papal bull was written in 1454 by Pope Nicholas V, again to the same King Afonso, as a follow-up to the previous Dom Diversas papal bull, and it confirmed it again to the crown of Portugal the dominion over all lands south of Cape Bojador in Africa. Please check out the locations of these lands, along with the encouraging the seizure of the lands of the Saracen Turks and non-Christians. It repeated the earlier papal bull's permission for the enslavement of such people. And you need to look up the term Saracen because it's linked to black, and you need to look up pagan because, as I was describing earlier, all our African religions were considered pagan, and essentially if you're a pagan you don't follow any of the Abrahamic religions, fitted the rest of the world who didn't know about Christianity and Judaism to a T. The Bulls of Donation, which is done by Pope Alexander VI, and the picture of him is on the right. By the way, the Pope Nicholas is on the far left. King Ferdinand is next to Alexander on the right, and King Afonso is next to Nicholas on the left. That's just to show you who the pictures are. Then you got the Bulls of Donation, also called the Alexandrine Bulls, are 3 papal bulls of Pope Alexander VI, delivered in 1493, which purported to grant overseas territories to Portugal and the Catholic monarchs of Spain. So they were basically carving the world up and saying, you can go out and enslave peoples on this side, and that's for you, Mr. Spain, and Mr. Portugal, you can enslave peoples on this side. And then here we have one of the major papal bulls you need to look up. It's called Inter Caetera, which was issued in 1493. Please look up that. All of those papal bulls, and along with your led to your Christopher Columbus's discovering these lands for Europeans. They were already discovered by us Africans, but discovered for the Europeans, and then they created this doctrine of discovery. Very important to look up as an African. These terms, doctrine of discovery, was promulgated by European monarchies in order to legitimize the colonization of lands outside of Europe. Colonization of lands outside of Europe, so they ain't doing it to themselves. Between the mid 15th century and the mid 20th century, so we're talking 1950s is mid 20th century, this idea allowed European entities to seize lands inhabited by indigenous peoples under the guise of discovery. Very important. And in 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas declared that only non-Christian lands could be colonized under the discovery doctrine. So guys, research these. It's very important, as Christianity has a blood on their hands, unfortunately. Again, just to summarize these sections, in essence, what they wanted to do was demonize our African culture while glorifying their Eurasian culture. And as you can see, they went about beating the best religion at the time, so they had a systemic attack on paganism. And by the way, paganism is a derogatory term to describe these religions. They have their own names in which they call themselves in their own right. We are generalizing when we use the word pagan, and we're basically saying if you don't follow the Abrahamic faiths, then you are classed as pagan, Gentiles, or heathen. And at the bottom of this page here, I'm just quickly trying to show to you that according to the narrative in these stories, where they want us to glorify their lands, Noah's boat landed in the mountains of Ararat, which is said to be in Turkey. And also they also state that the Ur of Chaldea is actually a mistranslation, and in the Hebrew it's known as Ur of Kasdim, which is actually a city in ancient Turkey, part of the world, around that part of the world. And so they say Abraham doesn't come from Sumeria or Chaldea, as we would have led to believe, but it's actually much further north from Turkey. So that's how you get us to glorify those lands and dismiss our people and our lands. Some of the points for further research important to the Bible. I'm not gonna go over them there. They're all on the screen. Zoroastrianism is quite important because all the concepts that we see in the modern religion of Christianity, God, devil, virgin birth of a savior, Holy Spirit, heaven and hell, final judgment, resurrection of the dead, angels, demons. All of these are found in Zoroastrianism, but Zoroastrianism actually predates Judaism and Christianity. So it seems like a fusion of this religion with other ancient religions, such as what was in ancient Egypt, is what's actually come to be this form of Christianity we have today. 5 scriptures I personally detest to the core. Luke 14, chapter 25. And there went great multitudes with him, and he turned and said unto them, If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, and yea, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. So basically telling you plain and simple, if you want to be a disciple of Jesus, you got to be able to hate all those people. Not dislike, not disagree. You've got to hate your father and your mother and your wife, etc. No explanation for that. Then as African people, we should take particular dislike to this particular text here. Ephesians chapter 6 verse 5. Servants, to be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, and as unto Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. So you've got to basically serve your slave master as if he is Christ or he is God, and do it with a smile. And this is part of the reason why this was the only book they allowed us to ever read in the period of slavery. They took away our ancient names, our indigenous names, our culture. They stripped us down to the core, and they wasn't allowing us to speak our own languages. But the one thing they would have let us do eventually, and it wasn't for all of us, but it was to read the Bible. And that's because they knew that communication and education was the key to liberation. So they wanted to keep you out of critically thinking and being educated, and keep you entrenched in a belief. Exodus 21 verse 20. And if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and die under his hand, he shall be surely punished. Notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is money. And as you can see, it's just basically telling you we are no more than another man's money, property. This is all legitimate in the Bible, by the way, as you can see. Numbers 31, chapter 17. We'll read on. Now therefore kill every man among the little ones. Fast forward. But all the women, children that have not known a man by lying with them, keep them alive for yourselves. So basically we're talking about women, children. This could be seen as pedophilia inside the Bible. I spoke about Gregory and his Hellenization of the book of Christianity in general. So you know, and if you understand about the way the Greeks and the Hebrews fused cultures when the Greeks took over the land of Israel and so forth, then you'd understand how some of their Hellenistic concepts can find their way in the Bible. But keep all the women, children, and these are the things that make me say this book isn't African, because I don't see that in African culture anywhere. Finally, 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 9. In like manner also the order, and this is for the women. If we go to chapter 12, actually it says, But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam was first formed, and then Eve. So basically saying, because man comes first, women need to be quiet. And then Adam was not deceived, and because woman was deceived, she was the one in transgression. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing, if they continue in faith and charity and holiness and sobriety. So basically it's the woman that has to carry the most burden. The woman must be in a subordinate position, must be silent, must not teach, must not usurp authority. It's to make sure the men are firmly in control of the paradigm, hence why it's a patriarchal religion. So if you've listened to all this straight, give yourself a pat on the back. It's a lot of powerful information to understand, and if it's the first time you've heard this information and you're coming from a religious background, you may be experiencing something that is known in the field of psychology as cognitive dissonance. And it's basically when you're confronted with new information that contradicts your said beliefs, ideas and values, You will feel a mental discomfort, a psychological stress, and we all have gone through it. It's sort of a, it's that pain you go through to reach your end goal of finding true knowledge and getting to the bottom of the truth. So please stay firmly listening. We're gonna now listen to another clip from The Matrix, and it's gonna talk about conscious trading, conscious agents in the community. They know the truth, but they prefer the comfort of what the belief gave them. Let's listen to this clip.
Do we have a deal, Mr. Reagan?
I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious. After 9 years, you know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss.
Then we have a deal.
I don't want to remember nothing. Nothing. You understand? I don't want to be rich. Someone important. Like an actor.
Whatever you want, Mr. Reagan.
Okay. You get my body back in a power plant. Reinsert me into the Matrix. I'll get you what you want.
Access codes to the...
So again, another crude transcription. He states, I know this state doesn't exist, but when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain it's juicy and delicious. After 9 years in the real world, I realize ignorance is bliss. And it also says, I don't want to remember nothing. I want to be rich, someone important like a pastor, and I'm saying like a pastor or a bishop. We do have pastors, reverends, who do know the truth about Christianity, because some of them have gone through some kind of theological study. They understand about the church fathers, patristics, and so forth. Some of this information I'm bringing to you, but they don't teach to their congregation, and that's because they'd probably end up losing their congregation once they took them out of the paradigm of belief. And it's a job at the end of the day. You'd lose money, lose your congregation, you lose money, you lose membership, eventually you'll lose your church. So in order to keep this thing going, they keep you in that state of belief and tell you stories that reinforce that belief out of the Bible, and don't show you some of the more obscure texts, some of the more questionable texts that are inside the book that may have you think on a deeper level. But then we got unconscious agents, just like in the Matrix, the woman in the red dress who suddenly, 1 minute it's a nice woman, next minute it's an agent with a gun to your face. Unconscious agents use formal and informal fallacies and go through a whole range of biases when forming their arguments, and they do it unconsciously. They think they're actually forming strong arguments to defend Christianity. But I'm going to give you just 3 examples of what they do on this page here. They do something called circular reasoning, and if you look at the illustration on the left, that's an example of circular reasoning, where the premise is the same as the conclusion. You'll find yourself, you'll never be able to break that cycle and come out of that box inside those conversations. The teapot is talking about Russell's teapot, for those that know, and it's when you shift the burden of proof. You can also look up flying spaghetti monster, because it's going to speak about something similar. So if I say to you there's a flying teapot in space, instead of me proving to you that there's a flying teapot in space, I tell you to prove me wrong. Because you don't have your own telescopes and you don't have your own tools and devices to prove you wrong, and nobody's in space looking for a flying teapot, it'll be impossible for you to actually prove me wrong. So I walk around as if, yep, you couldn't prove me wrong, so yeah, I'm right. There is a flying teapot in space. And that's essentially what they do when they try and prove items inside the Bible. They provide no evidence and they rely on you to disprove it. What they've just done is shifted the burden of proof. Final picture is an anachronism, and that's when basically you take something at one time period and you place it in another. So that's like me saying Jesus is walking around with Nike Air Maxes. Nike Air Maxes weren't around in Jesus' time. And so to put that in context, when you speak about the traveling on camels in Genesis, at the time that they're speaking of, camels wasn't actually domesticated, so that could be seen as an anachronism. Anti-intellectualism, very, very important, especially to our people. Anti-intellectualism is hostility and mistrust of intellect, commonly expressed as depreciation of education and philosophy, and the dismissal of art, literature, and science as impractical and even contemptible human pursuits. So don't pursue the arts, don't read and get into literature, don't worry about science. Those things are not important human pursuits. That is what is known as anti-intellectualism, and we've got a lot of that within our black community. Notable anti-intellectual philosophies include pragmatism, positivism, and they actually advocate distrust of reason and promote feeling and emotion over thought. You hearing that? Distrust of reason. So don't reason things out to make sense, but will promote feelings and emotions over your thought. Intuition over logic. Immediate action over critical consideration, and results over means. So yeah, we're going to speak about that a little bit more in the next slide, but it's a bad trait to have. Another thing we tend to do is something known as confirmation bias. This is one of the cognitive biases that we can experience. It's a phenomenon that confirms the validity of a person's self-accepted beliefs, ideals, and values to create emotional hostility towards a mistrust of other beliefs, ideals, and value systems to which the anti-intellectual person has not been exposed. So basically, somebody presents some information to you that you've never researched and you've never checked out, but automatically you're hostile to it. That would be confirmation bias. Also, when you're doing your research and you're looking for things, you're only looking for things that confirm your views. That would also be confirmation bias, and you're dismissing things that don't confirm your views. Now, with anti-intellectualism, the corporate mass media play quite a big role. Now, the effects of the mass media and attitudes towards intellect are certainly multiple and ambiguous. On one hand, mass communications greatly expand the sheer volume of information available for public consumption. On the other hand, much of this information comes pre-interpreted for easy digestion and laden with hidden assumptions, saving the consumers the work of having to interpret it for themselves. Commodified information naturally tends to reflect the assumptions and interests of those who produce it, just like the early church fathers. We're actually reflecting the assumptions and the interest of these church fathers and the Roman Empire who produced the Bible. And that attitude of taking that book on that basis is a form of anti-intellectualism. Now, also with the corporate mass media, its producers are not driven entirely by a passion to promote critical reflection. So it's not, when they're giving you things easily digestible on these TV History Channel, National Geographical, a lot of the information is false and it's got loads of hidden assumptions and a lot of agendas come into play when compiling these documentaries. So it's important we explore the literature, explore the science, use the scientific method, the historical method, and come to our own conclusions as a community. Unconscious agents and conscious agents alike, they will use certain tactics to get their point across. So one of them they'll do is they'll give you some bite-sized facts. So these are truths which are given to the audience so they can get the impression of credibility in the subject. Once they've established credibility with the audience, an opinion is then presented as a fact, only confirmed by the presenter's intuition, spirit, emotions, or general feelings. And I call this the Trojan horse, as people accept the opinion as fact purely because of the way it was delivered. Once people are able to discern between facts and opinion, once you apply the critical thinking that we spoke of earlier, hopefully you do more research into this. This would enable you to understand the pedigree, which is the actual value of the information, and and how to comprehend the context of how they've used the information. Danger alert. When somebody's telling you, oh, I'm a spiritual person and my spirit is telling me this and telling me that about you, I guarantee you, if you went to another spiritual person and you ask them for their opinions or tell them what their spirit tells them, you can actually have spirits in conflict. Now, in this instance, whose spirit do you trust? If one person dreams it's going to rain tomorrow and another person dreams it's going to snow tomorrow, whose dream is correct? This is the danger we get into when we dismiss information and we rely on people's dreams, spirits, intuitions, prophecies, visions, whatever it may be, because, you know, whose spirit could be right, whose dream could be right. Now, I always say, I'm not one to dismiss spirit, dreams, and intuitions altogether, but I will say we should only be using these things in the absence of information and in the absence of being able to critically think on something. Then we'd have to follow our intuition or our spirit or our ancestors on those things there on an individual basis. More tactics used to get points across. They'll emotionally blackmail you using fear, obligation, and guilt to manipulate your mind, to control your behavior. Basically, they will appeal to your emotions, especially in the absence of factual evidence. This kind of appeal to emotion is a kind of red herring and encompasses several logical fallacies, including appeal to consequences, appeal to fear, flattery, pity, ridicule, spite. So whatever they can do to sort of get you to do what they want, they will use it. And a lot of these techniques are entrenched in the Bible. So for example, we talked about the woman having to bear the pain of childbirth and not having to listen and usurp the authority of a man, and all that's to do with the original sin of Eve, which no woman today had any part in that. So why are they having to be punished in that way for it? That's called a guilt trip. Then we got something called Stockholm syndrome, and this is when the victim sees the smallest act of decent behavior as an extracted event, which makes them see their captors as essentially good. This way they leave aside all the negative behavioral distinctives from the captors and focus on the positive ones. And this is true. The reason why I left this in there is because the King James Bible was given to us by our captors, by our slave masters at the time, and what we've done is we seem to see something positive in the book when really we should be seeing it as this is the slave master book. We shouldn't be anywhere near it. But what Stockholm syndrome makes us do is leave aside all the negative behavioral distinctions and focus on the positive ones. The syndrome is also known as traumatic bonding or victim brainwashing. Please look these terms up once again. Thank you. Now, flawed approach leads to flawed results. On this screen, I've listed some cognitive biases, some formal and informal fallacies. I've put at the bottom segmented biblical attention on why it's not a good way that we should be reading these Bible texts, purely because books were written at different times by different people. Many books were removed from the canonical Bible, as I've shown lists before, and different books have different interpretations by different sects of the church and by different people, so it's very subjective. And finally, the last couple of slides are about those who, once you do the research and critically think and present a lot of this information to them, they tell you that this is the white man's information and that they have the original information from their ancestors and they hold up the Quran or the Bible or so forth. Now, there are those who assume that all information that originates from the white races are false, especially when it does not confirm their conclusions. No attempt is made to analyze whether information may gain errors or flaws. Instead, it is discredited based on the sole claim that it is the agenda of the white man to conceal what it is they are teaching. They claim that all history, not in uniform with what they're teaching, is merely the lies that we are led to believe from the white man. For this to be true, all museums, libraries, scientists, archaeologists, historians, authors, publishers, archives, universities, and governments all over the world, they all must have distorted primary and secondary sources throughout all time periods of history to produce a completely uniform whitewashed version of history. At the same time doing all of this, information created by the black man is the truth and has been evaded being tampered with by the white race. Now, all true scholars know this is an impossible feat for the white man to achieve due to the scale and the conformity required by all of the parties and institutions concerned or involved. When studying history, you will understand that some sources have been destroyed, distorted, or manufactured. A good historian is able to think critically and show how, where, and why a source of information was destroyed, distorted, or manufactured. They'll also look at all the facts and all the possibilities before reaching a conclusion, all stones unturned, all sources explored, all arguments heard before reaching their judgment. When you don't do that, you fall into the traps of, you potentially fall into the traps of being biased, and I've listed a few more biases on the screen so you can research these terms. Also, what I find funny is that they think that a black nationalist such as myself and many of our grandmaster teachers such as John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben Yosef Yakinen, Theophilo Benga, Sheikh Anta Diop, Chancellor Williams, you know, the list goes on, and they assume that many of our grandmaster teachers, both ancestors and elders that are still alive, have reviewed information, not understanding that the white man can't be trusted. In essence, you're assuming that they're blind to the fact that the white man can't be trusted and that they just read and digest everything that they're given from the European. What you need to understand is that these European sources are not glorified and are not held in high esteem. They are just analyzed for what they are, and it's just the deposits of information, and it's for us to extract the information, put it through our critical thinking machine, process the information, and come out with what we have discerned to be true out of that information and what we discern to be false out of the information. So if you're going to discredit our grandmaster teachers also, at least let me ask you a couple of questions. What evidence do you have to support your claim that the white man information is false? And what makes your white man information correct? Because I've just shown that the King James Bible is white man information. So what makes that information correct and will make anything else that we present invalid? That's confirmation bias, brothers and sisters. So please note, this would mean that our black master teachers such as John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben, Ivan Sentiment were all incorrect about our history, as they too have relied on the white man's history as sources. This type of fallacy opens the door to a world of obscure, uncredible, and unproven sources of information to rely on. Sources that a credible approach to verify and interpret has not been undertaken. This makes us susceptible to misinformation and fake news, which are actually created by the same people who want to keep us blind and ignorant. Judging information based on the tone of the author's skin color has led us to accept a lot of misinformation and disregard true information within our community. Family, we can do a lot better. It's 2017. It's time to lift the veil. It's time to come out of the box. It's time to break free from the matrix. Take the red pill. I am challenging the community to put all information through a process of critical thinking so we can discern between the fake news that is being circulated in the WhatsApp groups, in the Facebook, in the YouTube, these fake teachers that have popped up teaching information that they are not skilled in, that they are not scholars in, that they have not researched. They've probably read 1 and 2 books, and they go out miseducating the community. It's for those who know. Now it's time to step up to the age of knowledge so we can stand on a strong foundation and build our nation. Just like John Henry Clark said, Pan-Africanism or perish. Family, let's choose that red pill and put the blue pill in its right place. Peace, Hotep, one love. Please don't forget to share this video, like the video if you're watching it on YouTube, rewind this, make notes, do further research, and get in contact with myself. Just leave comments underneath. Much appreciate the feedback, and then any suggestions for future videos that I can put together. Thanks very much. Bye bye.